So, welcome everyone to Spin State Live. Today's conversation is about resilience, but not the version most of us were taught. So, not resilience as tough it out, not resilience as armour, but resilience as something much more human. So, I'm really grateful to be joined by my friend Ciaran May, a highly sought after keynote speaker and a consultant who works with some of the biggest organisations across the UK and Ireland. Ciaran brings a rare blend of lived experience and deep insight into human performance and leadership. Growing up in West Belfast, surrounded by walls, both physical and emotionally, he learned early that strength meant never showing a crack. From the outside, his life looked successful, a career, a reputation, an international powerlifter, but underneath he was carrying the weight of the world he couldn't connect with. So, Ciaran, it's brilliant to have you with us. Really appreciate it. So I'll open up with the first question. You grew up learning that strength meant armor, never showing weakness. But what did resilience mean back then? And how did that definition change after you hit rock bottom?
There's a lot of words that we have in our vocabulary now that didn't really exist in my vocabulary or a lot of people's vocabulary back then. Resilience being one of them, emotional intelligence, all these things, self-awareness, leadership. Like these were words I had never heard of before growing up. Even in school, when I reflect back at the whole way through secondary school, I'd never heard of depression. I'd never heard of anxiety. I'd never heard of ADHD or any of these things. But of course, a lot of people suffered with it or experienced it, but we just didn't have the linguistics or the knowledge of what it was. And so for me, resilience back then was just pure grit and determination. And I suppose the first memory of that was when I was about 7 years of age. A kid in the street hit me, as kids do. And my dad says, in typical Belfast father fashion, go out and hit him back. And this kid was 2 years older than me, and I remember looking up at him thinking he's like Godzilla. He's 2 years when you're this age now, he's nothing, but when you're in primary school, 2 years is massive. And it was just that attitude of be tough. It was tough love, resilience. Resilience was that. It was tough love. Now it was a great community. People were very close. There was a thriftiness. There was, a real hard work ethic. But when I talk about resilience, I talk about both sides of the coin. And I grew up only knowing one side of the coin, which was that work ethic, grit, determination, biting down on the gum shield and the capacity to be able to do tough things and weather the storm. And I suppose with time and experience and through my own learnings and life, I became aware that another side of the coin exists, and you must be aware and be able to tap into both sides of the coin to be truly resilient. And for me, the other side of the coin was things like, self-awareness first and foremost, but also things like compassion, empathy, getting to know your emotional triggers, getting to know how to regulate your nervous system, the things like authenticity. So all this is new to me, as in recent years, and I kind of shy away from saying I'm an expert in it by any stretch of the imagination. If anything, I would consider myself a student of it, because it is, only in recent years that I started to be aware of the other side of the coin. But certainly when I started to integrate both sides of the coin, I, as a human being, felt a lot more fulfilled and a lot more rounded and grounded to kind of navigate through life and all its obstacles and ups and downs.
And I've had the benefit of knowing you for quite some time. You know what I mean? So many founders and leaders are wearing armor, performing strength, carrying pressure, holding it all together while feeling increasingly disconnected underneath. And that's something I certainly see with founder-led businesses. So let's maybe peel the onion a little bit more here. So I guess redefining resilience then. So most people think resilience is about bouncing back or pushing through. From your experience, what does true resilience look like in real life?
There's that natural ebb and flow of life. There's different seasons that sometimes you go into seasons where it can, you have to be resourceful and you have to have grit and determination. But sometimes resilience is having good people around you. Sometimes resilience is knowing when to push back as opposed to pushing forward. And for me, resilience, like moving beyond the buzzword resilience, it all goes back to self-awareness. For me, all these things come back to self-awareness, knowing thyself. So knowing when you feel uncomfortable in a conversation, knowing when you need a rest, knowing when you need time off without feeling guilty for it, knowing when you need to do the uncomfortable thing. Like it all comes back to self. And I don't think there's one. I think we've become obsessed as a society of having this one size fits all approach. And I would kind of be reluctant to say this is what is resilient. I think what I would say is to be resilient, you have to know yourself. And for me, how I do that is things like journaling, which has been really effective for me, of just somebody that kind of overthinks quite a bit, to be able to get things out of my head and onto paper. I'm a huge fan of the Whoop, which is a device that measures things like heart rate variability, sleep, stress. Again, I'm quite a driven and ambitious person, but that is a double-edged sword sometimes. So having that data and feedback to be able to say, okay, well, sleep hasn't been great. I'm going to prioritize. I'm going to make informed decisions. So, society would lead you to believe that resilience, a bit like discipline, is quite militaristic. And there's a study done that when you write words such as resilience and discipline, people think of the American drill sergeant, shouting orders, and resilience is just about doing tough things. But it's at its very core, in my opinion, it's self-awareness, and it's knowing that, I suppose, as self, as the founder, that when to push, when to pull, when to ask for help, and when you need the support of the tribe around you to continue to navigate the seasons and the ups and downs.
I read an article from Tasha Ulrich. She wrote a book called Shatterproof, and it's all about resilience. 90% of the human population believe that they're self-aware, but only 10% of us actually show the traits of self-awareness. And then when you overlay that into kind of Ryan Gottfridson's work on vertical development, like only 8% of business leaders actually have a how can I add value to the world type of mindset, where the majority of business leaders have a mindset of what can I take from the world. So that self-awareness piece is so important, but it's about giving yourself the space, I guess, and creating that space and time to sit with whatever you need to sit with. Would you agree?
I would agree, David. I mean, I hear people all the time saying, "Oh, the younger generation are not resilient," and I would beg to differ. I think resilience comes with experience, and it comes with age, and it comes with maturity, and as a behavioural trait, it has to be developed. And I'm 40. Was I resilient at 14? Well, I was as resilient as I could be. When I was 21, I was as resilient as I could be. When I'm 55, I will be as resilient as I could be. And the same goes for self-awareness. I think when you start to say, I'm self-aware, I'm resilient, you completely miss the point. And we're constantly meeting ourselves, and we're constantly meeting ourselves at new levels, and we're constantly getting to know ourselves at a deeper level. And for me, that's the whole thing around self-awareness and self-mastery. There's no end point. I think the day and hour that you accept that you're a student of self as opposed to a master of self, that's when you've probably leveled up with regards to your knowledge. Was it Socrates, one of the philosophers, said, we know nothing, and that student mindset, I think, is key to self-development, in that it's an acceptance that we're constantly getting to meet ourselves at a deeper level, and constantly getting to express ourselves.
Armor versus strength. You talk about taking the armor off. What does that armor look like in today's leaders, and what does it cost them to keep wearing it? And just before you answer that question, 2.5, 3 years ago, I represented the dark side of business, where by keeping that armor on and trying to wear a mask all the time, it had a detrimental effect on me and my health, and even my family. So what does that armor look like in leaders today, Ciaran? And what does it cost them to keep wearing it, in your opinion, of course?
It's usually fear. It's usually fear-based. It's usually, and when you go deeper with leaders, when you're kind of getting to know them through one-to-one or coaching, a lot of it is a fear that can be directly linked back to childhood. It could be fear of success. It could be fear of rejection. Again, I think, in my opinion, that very rarely is it anything to do with ego. So again, society would have you to believe that it's egotistical. But what ego is in itself is fear-based. And so that armor is usually some piece of fear that if I take this off, there's going to be an element of vulnerability. And they're linking that vulnerability to weakness. And at a very primal level within the human psyche, weakness means that you can be preyed upon. Um, and so what the costs of it within the leadership world at present are that when you have the armor on, it's, well, first and foremost, it's harder for your people to connect to you, because what they're getting is the persona. If you look at Carl Jung speaks quite extensively about this. They're attaching to the persona, but they're never really connecting with the true person. Um, and I think again, as society, we have been led to believe that the armor must stay on, and we must constantly be in the persona. Or the new expression I heard recently is that like blue tick persona. So people have to pretend there's somebody else on social media. But the problem with that is people connect with a version of you that's not real. And I think when leaders take off the armor, um, initially there is that feeling of vulnerability, which is never a nice feeling. If you compare that to the animal kingdom, that feeling of vulnerability, it forces animals to kind of flee, or it forces them to revert back into their cave. And I think humans very much do the same, where they try to be themselves or express themselves, and for that split second they feel vulnerable, or they feel open to criticism or ridicule. And the first thing they want to do is to feel safe again within their body. And so they put the armor back on. And that's probably the thing. As I kind of reflect on my life, I would say that from I was a teenager uh, up until recent years, I lived with that armor on 24/7. And the reason being, it was very fear-based. It was a defense mechanism. So I'm covered literally from my collarbone right down to my ankles, my arms, covered in tattoos. I had a skinhead at one point that was always into to muscles. But what it was at its very core was a fear-based thing of don't hurt me, don't come near me. So the armor in the corporate world is that version, only it exists in a suit, and it exists in the conversations that they have with people, and it exists in the struggle to be empathetic or compassionate. But for me, it's easy to blame the leader, but ultimately I think if you sat that leader down and done some form of coaching or therapy or some form of self-reflection or self-awareness, it all usually comes back to some form of fear-based childhood trauma, or some form of childhood unconscious scenario where they learned that putting an armor on was safety. So it's always a protective mechanism. It's always a defensive mechanism. And again, we're not taught this, particularly in the corporate world. But what I do think, again, I can only speak from experience. The day and hour you realize you're wearing an armor, first and foremost, is a great day, and then you're presented with a choice. And of course, you can choose to this. Well, what is it like when I take this off and explore myself? And for me, it quite literally was taking body armor off, where you can feel your shoulders relax and you realize I've been carrying a weight this whole time. I've been carrying the weight of the world on my shoulders this whole time. And again, from my own experience, kind of taking that off and starting to embrace who I am as opposed to other people's expectations. It's allowed me to connect with people at a much deeper level, and it's allowed me to develop trust and to be seen as trustworthy within my own circle. And that has been a massive net gain for me, and a very positive experience.
You mean those fears, that fear of judgment or fear of failure? I think Seamus Fox, we were interviewing him or talking to him at the Hero's Journey there Sunday week ago, and one of the lines, I think the conversation was around imposter syndrome, and one of the lines that just blew me away because I've never heard it like that is imposter syndrome is a comparison trap. And it's that comparison, isn't it, that you're always turning up and comparing yourself to the world around you, consciously and subconsciously. And it's that subconscious piece that effectively is driving the show, isn't it?
The word I would use to describe the feeling that I get when I try to take off that armor is it's liberating. It is very liberating. Like when liberating when you don't compare yourself to others, or care of other people's opinions, or you know I, I would rather accept myself than fit into somebody else's version of me that doesn't that only kind of exists in their mind, if that makes sense.
So this one's around performance and vulnerability, and you touched on vulnerability there. You mean you come from world of elite performance, namely the powerlifting. I know we used to have a joke about the distance in which you had to bench press compared to the Olympic lifters in the other room. I couldn't resist. But how did your understanding of performance change once you realized that vulnerability isn't a weakness, it's actually a strength?
It's a funny one. Like it very much was, and I think a lot of this goes for high level sports is you don't show vulnerability. You know, it's like I watch my son's 12 and plays football, and a lot of the kids are even learning that where if they get kicked by accident by another team, they don't like to show weakness, almost that psychological thing, you know, they'll get back up and get on with it. Again, going back to that double two sides of the coin with resilience, there is a time and place for that. You know, it's particularly in the world of anything performance related, like you have to pick yourself up time and time again. You have to toughen up. I think if I compare that version of resilience, if we use the analogy of powerlifting, when I was lifting a lot of weights, I developed calluses on my hand. And the reason I developed calluses on my hand is because you constantly have a barbell and you constantly have heavy weight resting on your hands. So your hand's defense mechanism for that is to toughen, and it toughens up to allow you to perform at a higher level. I think when you aren't aware of that other side of the coin, which includes vulnerability, you develop kind of those calluses on your heart. And for me, again, vulnerability, what is it at its core? It's that version of psychological safety where you feel comfortable enough in your own skin to be able to say anything, really. You know, it's you feel comfortable in your own skin to feel accepted within the group, whether it's powerlifting, whether it's business, whether it's family. And if you feel accepted within a group, then vulnerability is something as simple but very powerful as saying, I need help. I'm not feeling it today. I don't understand that question. I need support over here. And for me, it is a massive net gain as a founder, because the reality is, as a founder of a small business, you're trying to learn skills like marketing, sales, finances, operations, AI, all these things. And it is completely absurd to think that you can understand all that and be proficient in all that. And the reality is, vulnerability is not a weakness. It's a form of self-awareness and self-understanding to say, you know, in a very positive way, could you help me with this? Could you support me with this? And if you look at, you know, tribes, for example, there were the hunter gatherers, there were, you know, there were the warriors, they were the planners, the navigators. So people are good at certain things, but they're not good at everything. And vulnerability is that self-acceptance and that psychological safety to have the courage within a group to say, you know, you've asked me to navigate, but I don't understand that really well. I need help there. If we look at that from a founder point of view, it could be, you have asked me to improve in my marketing or social media or email marketing. I've never done that before. Could I get help? Do you know any courses that are available? Is there any YouTube videos you could pass to me? Is there any grants that I could get mentoring in that? Is there anyone that would, if I pay them, that could come and show me the ropes with that? So vulnerability, I think, is a massive positive thing. And for me, it's never a weakness, really. You know, I would, there's a quote I love, and I remember coming across it years ago, which said, oh God, what is it? Essentially that you know, to be vulnerable is to be human, and to be human is the greatest strength of all. And really, it was just to show that society has led us to attach an awareness of the word vulnerability, and that it's weak. But I would suggest that there's a reframe there, and that it's actually quite strong. You know, it takes courage, in my opinion, to be able to speak up and ask for help. But what that courage does within the workplace, what that courage does within the family home, or what it does within the tribe is, it's massively beneficial. It's a win-win for everyone, because you're asking for support, and once you get that support, you can perform better, which is to the betterment of the tribe. So I would say, from a performance point of view, it's probably the one thing that in 2026 we're still lacking an understanding of, but I think it adds a massive value to any organization or to any collection of people whatsoever.
Okay. On the bottom left, just to the left of the microphone, there's a little raise your hand. Does anybody want to ask a question? We'll take two questions. And then well, let's see if anyone has a question, first of all. If not, we'll crack on. Anyone?
I'm all for questions. I think they're always great to have kind of unscripted back and forth.
From your experience to date, have you found any approaches that work with leaders to bridge between coaching and therapy? Is there any approaches, techniques, anything that you can say, yeah, that's my go-to? Of course, it's going to be dependent on the individual, but is there anything that you'd recommend or suggest as a starting point with fear in leaders?
It's a great question, actually. Both have helped me as a person develop, and so therefore I would have to say both would be beneficial. I think that therapy is a benefit to everyone, in that we all have fears. We have all attached emotional stories to certain experiences, certain memories, and therapy can help you make heads or tails of that, and to kind of heal inner wounds. And so again, I'm going to refer to both sides of the coin, and use that analogy. I think therapy is a very beneficial side of the coin. I suppose without coaching, therapy can be ruminating on the story over and over and over again, and never moving on beyond that. And I think that's where coaching comes in from a world of its own. Is, yes, the therapy is helping us dealing with that, and it's okay to have scars, but ultimately it's important that we continue on our journey, and continue on our journey of self-discovery and self-analysis. And I've personally never done both with a leader. I think this, well, I'm not a therapist, but and I think it's quite personal. But I do think that a leader that has been open to addressing some of those subconscious beliefs, and some of those fears that potentially emanate from childhood, and is willing to take the time and the introspection and the self-reflection to approach those with a sense of curiosity and compassion, and then when he or she is ready, allow themselves to be guided by a coach to the next stage of their journey, which is moving beyond that. So I don't have an example of an exercise or a system or framework that does both, but I do think both has played a very positive part on my journey, and that, therapy, Porrick, doesn't have to be in an office with a live therapist all the times. It can come in the form of self-analysis, and self-introspection, and even asking questions of yourself, and a good friend can do that. But I think a two-pronged approach to that self-discovery to allow you to be coached forward is always a really good thing.
Okay, Ciaran, we're going to move on to emotional intelligence then. So, you've said that real human performance is rooted in emotional intelligence. So, why is emotional intelligence still so undervalued and yet so critical in leadership?
It baffles me. My only take on it is that, people are moving so fast that they never really have an opportunity to kind of take time and step out and reflect on themselves. But at its core, performance is emotional intelligence. I mean, when you look at the science behind it, our human behavior, the behavior in which we display on a daily basis, is directly correlated to our emotional state. And the thing with our emotional state is, it's a bit like an algorithm. So when you feel a certain way, there's maybe an algorithm of a dozen actions that you can take. And what I mean by that is, when you're irate, or you're angry, or you're frustrated, it's virtually impossible to act out of composure, groundedness, harmony, and balance. when you're in a state of, fear, it is very tough to act or to behave in a way that would be in alignment with courage or compassion and so on and so forth. So an understanding of your emotional state, an understanding of your physiology is directly related to your life performance. What I mean by that is, not just performance with regards to weights you're lifting or figures you're doing or turnover, but, how you're showing up and how you're behaving. And so for me, that emotional intelligence is everything, because we are humans and humans are emotional beings. And I think there's levels to it. And again, you're getting to know levels. I kind of explained that when I was in secondary school, um, you often felt the feelings of nerves before an exam or anxiety going into first year for the first time, but you didn't really have the vocabulary or the words to describe it. And then that's the next stage, being able to, well, what is this feeling, that I'm experiencing? So I'm feeling a certain way in my body. How would I name it? And then I suppose beyond that is like, what has caused me to feel this way? Like, I've experienced an external event, but I am internally processing this and it's feeling a certain way, either in my chest, in my stomach, in my head, whatever it may be. And so you start to develop as you become older, you start to become aware of your emotional patterns and the things that trigger you to feel a certain way, good or bad or indifferent. Um, and then I suppose, going deeper into it again, is this pattern serving me? If not, is there a way of breaking the pattern? Is there a way of turning the pattern a different direction, almost like a domino effect? And so I think emotional intelligence is performance in itself. There's actually very little logic to performance, other than how we cognitively process information. But ultimately, how we are cognitively processing information is directly impacting our emotional state and how we feel, and that is the driver of our behaviors and our actions. So, I mean, it's proven, it's factual, and I can't answer the question why it's so undervalued. Um, but I think there is some form of collective. I think COVID probably allowed people to slow down for the first time and start to think, well, I have just felt as if I've been on a treadmill or a hamster wheel for so long, and I've probably put up a barrier to those emotions and just continued on. And I think COVID was the first time where a lot of people started asking questions of themselves and started to become more accustomed to how they're feeling, particularly because there was a lot of uncertainty. Um, and I think it's a conversation. You have people like Brené Brown and, a lot of influential people talking now about the importance of things like authenticity and emotional intelligence. But I think the conversation should never be buzzwords and it should never be superficial. Otherwise it's doing it a complete injustice. But I suppose I'm on a crusade at the minute with senior leaders and teams, is to show them that self-awareness and emotional intelligence isn't soft skills. They are core life and leadership skills. And I would say that your ability to lead people, bearing in mind we're leading other human beings, your ability to lead other human beings is in correlation to your level of self-awareness and emotional intelligence.
There's a saying that Ryan mentions a lot. I know it resonates with both of us. You mean a leader or a business can only scale or elevate to the emotional and cognitive ability of the leader. And us as humans, we can rationalize things till the cows come home. It's that emotional piece where we really need to get a handle on. It's so important. Lorcan, I'm sorry that you were denied the permission to unmute there. I'll take that up the circle later on, but I will read the question. Ciaran, when your resilience is being tested to the limit and you have a wobble, in inverted commas, which I'm guessing you probably do at times, what techniques do you use to ground yourself and bring yourself back?
I had a great conversation with somebody about this recently. So, like, we're all business owners on this call, which means that you enter the arena of life. Business is a contact sport. You get plenty of bumps and bruises along the way, and so your resilience is tested. I think that the thing I keep coming back to, David, is there's so much we can do before we enter the arena, which increases our ability to be resilient. It increases our window of tolerance, and it is all simple, low hanging, but highly effective fruit, and for me, where my head at the minute is with this is, looking at quality of sleep, looking at quality of food, hydration, quality of social connection. I think those four things in itself, they massively increase your capacity to be resilient. If I suppose if you are running on fumes and you feel as if that your resilience is being tested, what works for me is going back to the basics is just knowing, okay, I feel as if I'm pushing and I'm being pushed. I feel as if I'm at my limit. Again, going back to that self-awareness piece of, I know my direction of travel has been going, slowly towards cognitive and emotional burnout. And if it continues to go in that direction, something's going to give, and that's going to be me. So I need to stop, and it's a bit like lean manufacturing. When there's a fault in the system, you stop there and then and fix it. So it's becoming aware of the fault and then stopping. And I suppose again, which comes with a bit of maturity and a bit of age, is, what is I always ask myself that question: what is the cost of winning at all costs? And if the cost is going to be detrimental to me, my family, my health, so on and so forth, then perhaps it's time to start moving the direction of travel back this way and filling up my own cup. And what that looks like for me, Lorcan, is again very simple. I think we overcomplicate all this process. For me, it's a walk in nature. It won't make me feel perfect, but it'll take the edge off. It's a sea swim with friends. It's a catch up with a handful of people that I know top me up, and I love reconnecting with them. It could be an early night. It's I think when we're being pushed in that direction, we make unconscious decisions. And I think to get back towards green or towards flow, we need to consciously make decisions, and that is taking the low hanging fruit of an early night's sleep, cutting out alcohol, cutting out greasy food, just suppose a form of self-care, self-compassion, in that if you're still pushing and up the high dough, is it in any way, shape, or form going to make you feel better? The reality, for me, the answer is no. And so it is doing different things. I'm not sure if it's Ryan Goffredson or not, David, but it's that expression: what got you here won't get you there. And if you're teetering around burnout, what's not going to get you out of burnout is the things you've been doing for the last few weeks. And so it's never the straw that breaks the camel's back, but it's about realizing that the camel's back is about to break and going, okay, stop. I need to do the opposite. And the opposite is usually less. The opposite is usually less pushing, less cold calls, less working, and oftentimes it's more about pulling back, and allowing the batteries to recharge again. And I think that's what performance is in itself. Again, if you study the world of sports, performers are never always on. Performers perform short periods of time. A professional footballer plays once or twice per week for 90 minutes. And they will train for that. They will develop for that. They will also recover and pull back. And the corporate world is a bit perverse in that there's an expectation that people should be on and perform much longer than 90 minutes. In fact, there's this expectation that people should perform for 10 to 12 hours per day for 5 to 6 days per week. But from a human performance point of view, over the long term, your performance is actually going to decrease significantly, because you're never running on optimal. You're always running on fumes. Again, like what I try to do now, even with work, is the work in time blocks. I know I can be extremely efficient and get a hell of a lot done in 2 hours. If I give myself 2 hours, I can cover a lot of ground. But after that, I'll close the laptop, have a coffee, go for a walk, take a call, go and do something, because I know, as much as I've done a lot, the hamster wheel's going. And if I was to try and drag that out for 3 to 4 to 6 hours, by the time hour four came along, my performance has significantly decreased. And I know that if I did 2 hours in the morning and maybe 2 hours later afternoon, my work's going to be of a better quality. I'm going to be able to connect with people more. So it's I think a lot like David, you and I spoke about, a lot of modern leadership training and literature isn't really congruent to this modern version of performance. And I think a lot of the performance related kind of frameworks that are out there all kind of go back to the industrial age of, people should work in factories and work 12 hours a day, but that's not performance by any stretch of the imagination.
That's really powerful stuff. Really powerful. I had a follow-on question there, but I'm going to come back to that later. I'm going to talk about human beings and not human resources, Ciaran. And then what we're going to do is we're going to put another couple of questions out to the floor. We're coming towards the end now. So you often say that people want to be treated like human beings, not human resources. So what happens to performance when leaders truly understand that?
I struggle to kind of, not fit in's the wrong word, but the world, the corporate world, I think it's just a lot of it. Excuse my French, but it's a lot of it's bullshit, And again, like it's no one's fault, or I'm not blaming anything, but it is just this merry-go-round of factory workers, and unfortunately, people go to work and they're nothing more than a number, nothing more than a pawn, and like even that word human resources, you're just a resource for this organization. You're just a resource to work for this factory, to work for this tech firm to make us profit. But again, going back to the purity and the essence of performance is people perform at a higher level when they feel accepted into a group, when they feel part of something bigger than themselves, that they know where the organization wants to go, so therefore they contribute to that vision. And at the end of it, there's something in it for them. So if somebody's just treated like a human resource, you're just a number, you're just a badge number, you're just a conveyor belt person. Are you going to get the best out of that person? Absolutely not. And so what does somebody want to do when they go into work for somebody 9 to 5 or whatever it may? They want to feel seen, heard, valued, and understood. And what that means is they want to be accepted as a human being, that they're unique. They have their own unique thumbprint. They have their own unique mannerisms. They have their own unique perception and map of the world. They've had their own experiences to date. And even if everyone within that factory is standing on the same mountain peak, their journey to the top has been entirely different. They've all seen it and experienced it through a different lens. And for me, we need to move away from this idea that work is just about making money. And I'm all for that, and I think there needs to be profitable businesses, and business need to make more profit, and so on and so forth. But if your business employs people, they are your greatest asset. They're not just a resource. And so your job as a leader, a big part of that job as a leader, should be getting to understand those people so that you can see them for who they are, so that you can support them, so that you know their quirks, so that if they go quiet, then perhaps maybe there's something going on. And like I seen a piece of research recently, and I can't remember the statistics, but there was something like 3% of people in certain organizations had only ever met their boss, or 3% had only ever met their boss face to face, and the rest of their conversations with their boss was done through what I call kind of chimpanzee speak on email. Be here at 12, see you there. Did you get this finished? And what it does is it desensitizes humans, and it makes them feel robotic. And there's enough robots and AI in the world for to be able to talk like that. But I think humans need more than that. And the reason humans need more than that is because there's something within human beings that will never exist within robots, which is the very essence of humanity. It's that spirit, or it's that soul that exists within all of us. And I think that organizations, well, strip the word organizations or companies away, but families, community groups, schools, teams, friends, they know that. And I think the more organizations realize that, well, David Maxwell's joined our company, and he's not just a resource. He's not just there to plug a gap. He's a human being with human needs. I think when we start to have that conversation, that's when we're going to get the best out of David Maxwell. That's when he's going to want to feel, that's when he feels fulfilled. That's when he wants to go above and beyond for the organization, because he feels part of its fabric. And for me, if you get 20 David Maxwells coming in and feeling accepted and part of the group, then that the group performs at a much higher level.
That's one of the catalysts behind spin state. You know what I mean? I wrote a paper on this, the business people paradox. Can people in business truly exist under the same roof and have those human needs fulfilled and the business needs fulfilled? I heard a terminology there a few weeks ago. You mean human beings are like countries? You mean they've got their own borders, they've got their own culture, they've got their own cuisine, they've got their own currency, their own laws. And anytime you go on holiday, you mean you got to respect those boundaries. You know what I mean? So I thought that was very profound. So this conversation cuts right to the heart of spin state's people first operating system. I mean, if leaders lead from armour, purpose becomes performative, vision feels hollow, and accountability becomes pressure. But when leaders lead with humanity, trust deepens, ownership increases, and performance becomes sustainable. So resilience isn't about never breaking, it's about building something strong enough that you don't have to. So before I just ask for two more questions to the floor, Ciaran, I mean, if you were to give everybody here one practice or reflection that helps them build real resilience, not just surface toughness, what would it be?
Well, for me, what I use, and I do this every Sunday. It was of Pat Dively had used it with us before, and it's like a traffic light system of a check-in, green, orange, or red, and it's asking yourself 3 questions from each of those emotional states. So, if green means high energy, rest and digest, and flow, how are you answering the 3 following questions, which are I am, people are, and the world is. So, for example, when I'm in flow and I feel good, I would probably describe myself as energetic. I would see people as friendly, and I would see the world as opportunistic. You then put the orange state glasses on, and that's a bit of fight or flight, where you're maybe feeling as if your resilience is being tested. And those answers to those 3 questions become something entirely different. And I could then describe myself as I am stressed, people are annoying, and the world is moving too fast. And for me, I check in with myself every Sunday night and ask myself 2 questions. First and foremost, those 3 questions, how am I describing them? Am I at green, orange, or red? But secondly, what is my direction of travel? If I'm an orange moving towards green, then it's okay. If I'm an orange moving towards red, then it needs to stop, and I need to start doing things that move myself back this way again. And off the back of that, I will journal. I journal every Sunday night, and it's not about writing literature or war on peace. I ask myself 5 questions. The first question is kind of checking in with myself logically. How do I think the week went? And so that's a logical reflection on the week. The second thing I would do is how do I feel the week went? So that's a bit of an emotive check-in, because we lie to ourselves. You could think, oh, I think the week went great, but you're lying exhausted on a Sunday night. So it's an emotional check-in, which kind of should corroborate your traffic light system. And again, just to double check that, I use a whoop, which quite literally gives you green, orange, or red with regards to your nervous system. So checking logically, checking emotionally, and from a feeling point of view. I will then ask myself the third question is, what is one win that I came across this week? So it's just a case of, what went well? There's always something that went well. The fourth question I asked myself is, what is one obstacle I came across? And the fifth and final question is, what is one thing I can improve upon next week? And for me, that it sounds overly simplistic, but what it does for my very simple brain is it allows me to reflect on how it's going from a logical point of view and how I'm processing information logically. It allows me to check in with myself emotionally and learn, like, what is my general emotional state been this week? Do I feel as if I've got this Sunday and I've fell over the line, or do I feel good? What's working well? What can I do more of? Where do I feel as if I'm getting a return from the world? What is one obstacle coming across? And the beauty of that question is, if you get the same answer on one Sunday and the next Sunday and the third Sunday and the fourth Sunday, the reality is you're probably avoiding something that needs addressed with, and the avoidance itself is probably causing you a lot of stress. So it's what it does is, for me, it's about that direction of travel. If I can check in with myself and just make a note, and it's never taken more than 15 minutes, usually takes about 5, then I can see what's working, I can see what needs addressed, I can see what I need to do for myself with regards to my emotional state and the direction of travel that I'm moving in. And that has been the most significant and effective thing that I've done to develop my own resilience. It's free. I write it in pen and paper. If I don't have a pen and paper handy, I put it in the notes section of my phone, and that's it.
Right, we'll take 2 more questions, and then we'll close it up for the day. I really appreciate your time, everybody. Anybody got any more questions? Stephen, if you want to unmute and crack on, sir.
There's something I want to ask. Last year I read The Alter Ego Effect by Todd Herman. And this is where he delves into performance stars and how they have that alter ego and how they tap into it. You know, the likes of Beyonce with Sasha Fierce, Jim Carrey as well when he gets on set. But also then Kobe Bryant, who was known for that Black Panther, and how when he went on the basketball court, he just switched and was a completely different person. This kind of set me in a bit of a rabbit hole because I was like, that looks like an ultimate really good performance hack, if you like. But then I sort of grappled with it because, like, does that take away from authenticity and you showing up as yourself? But then the longer it went on, I thought that's maybe you truly knowing yourself, that you know when to put it on or when to step into the arena. But alter ego effect for performance, it's not really spoken about, I don't think. I'm just wondering, like, what your opinion of it is, and do you see it as a worthwhile hack?
And I think my natural state's actually somebody that's quite shy, but because of my work, I have to network a lot. And like, there's a term I love which describes me to a T, which is ambivert, which means I'm neither an extrovert or an introvert. But when I spend time with large groups of people, I really need to kind of then kick time to myself to decompress and allow my own battery to switch up again. So for me to stand on stage and talk to a large room of people, I need to flip into that kind of natural resilience alter ego of I'm comfortable, I've confidence, I've got the resilience to do this, which is night and day through the person that's, you know, quite reserved. And so for me, it's been a massive net gain. And my way of getting there was very similar to yourself in that it makes sense to be able to go into a different emotional state, and the different emotional state suits you from a performance point of view. So, you know, to go on stage or to go onto the basketball court or to go into whatever it may be. I mean, essentially what your alter ego is, it's an emotional state which you are naming. And as opposed to naming that excitement or, you know, confidence, you're naming it Sasha Fierce or Black Mamba. You know, that's essentially what we're doing from a physiology point of view. And again, a bit like yourself, I was thinking, but is that at the expense of authenticity? Are you a performing monkey? And again, going back to Jungian kind of psychology and Carl Jung, who spoke and was the first kind of psychologist that made sense to me with regards to this, was he talks about different aspects of the psyche, and there's the persona, which is the hat you wear to go out, and he kind of describes it of, you know, you wake up in the bed in the morning as self, you know, you are yourself. And what we do with the persona is we dress the self, we put a uniform on the self. But how I suppose process that, Stephen, was the reality is that for life we do put on uniforms multiple times a day, and we have to. And in actual fact, it's very healthy. So for me, my kids don't want me to be, you know, public speaker, natural resilience at the dinner table or in the evening with them. My wife doesn't want me to be like that. And so my uniform has to be one of a father. It has to be one of a husband. But likewise, during the day, it has to be one of a business owner. When I go to my mum's house, she couldn't care less about A, B, and C. She wants me to be her son. And so we do put the performative uniform on, and we have to be different things to different people. In actual fact, when you look at neuro-linguistic programming and human behavior, it says the person with the most flexibility has the most power in the room. So we do constantly kind of change. The difference being is it's very healthy so long as you know that it's a persona, so long as you know that it's a uniform, and so long as you know that who you are underneath that at its core. And again, I remember speaking to somebody over lockdown, somebody I was kind of having conversations with, and they had a mental breakdown, or a bit of a nervous breakdown, and they're, you know, they were in the public eye quite a bit, and they said, I lost sense of self. and they spoke about that they spent so much time in he called it the blue tick persona, so much time public facing, putting so much energy into his role that he forgot who he was. And I think going back to my last point is that we can't perform all the time. We can perform in a boardroom, we can perform at, periods of time. And this is why a lot of athletes have rituals. So they have a ritual before they embrace the persona. And people call them superstitions. That could be tying your football boots a certain way, and when they do the last knot, they step into their alter ego. Or it could be somebody walking out on the stage, and their last thing is to spin the ring 3 times, and it's into their. So the ritual gets you into the persona, but there should also be a ritual to get you out of your persona. And for me, sometimes I know if I've had a really full on day in work, my ritual is, I park the car at Stonyford Reservoir, which is about 10 minutes from my home, and I'll sit and watch the water for 5 minutes, or I'll go a walk around, because it just gets me out of go business and into that persona is not, it doesn't have a positive net gain going back to 2 kids that just want a father, or a wife that just wants a husband. So I think so long as you're in control, like all these things, but like technology, so long as you have the self-awareness to know and control when you're going into the alter ego, it can be healthy. But that would be just my take on it.
Lorcan just made a point there. You're the first person, the first time someone has in your space has suggested journaling less than every day evening. I'm going to start that again and try that this weekend. Absolutely. You've got to do what fits yourself. And I guess if you start trying to conform to other people, all you're going to do is put yourself under pressure. Yeah. Right. So with 3 minutes until the hour, I can take one more quick question if somebody wants to put their hand up. If not, I'm more than happy to close out and thank Ciaran for his time. Okay. Well, look, today reminded us of something essential. Resilience isn't about being harder. It's about being truer. Ciaran, I really want to thank you for your honesty and courage, and for reframing what strength really means. And thanks to everybody who's joined us here today. I really appreciate your time. Next month, Thursday the 26th, we've actually got Ryan Godfredson, who is a world authority on vertical development. And for those who know me, I've had that record on since January of 2022, and I'm still not getting tired of it. So that will definitely be one that I'm looking forward to. So look, have a great day. Thanks for everything, and we'll see you very soon. Thanks, Lorraine. Take care of yourselves.